This project examined Irish speakers from East Belfast who enlisted to fight in World War I. 74 soldiers were identified. They lived in the working class communities around Ballymacarrett and worked in the local factories and the shipyard. They included family groups, neighbours and workmates. 3 years before the war, in the 1911 census, all had said they spoke Irish. George Wright lived in Upper Frank Street with his parents John and Maria and his 9 siblings. In 1911, George was just 14 years old and already working as an apprentice clerk. George was barely 18 when war broke out. Like many from East Belfast, he enlisted with the Royal Irish Rifles and served as a private. 3 of his brothers also served. George was injured in the war but survived. William Spence was almost 40 years old at the outbreak of the war. He and his wife Maggie lived in Josephine Street with their 6 surviving children. Before the war, William worked as a labourer. His eldest son worked in the rope works and his eldest daughter was a factory worker. William had signed the Ulster Covenant in Westbourne Presbyterian Church. William joined the Royal Enniskilling Fusiliers before the start of the war. In 1915, he was sent to France where he was wounded and later taken prisoner. He too survived and returned home after the war ended. Not all of our soldiers were so fortunate. 17 of them died during the war, 5 at the Battle of the Somme and most of the others at other parts of France and Flanders, and some as far away as Gallipoli. Many of our soldiers are commemorated at memorials like this one across East Belfast. Gerald King was the second eldest of 5 sons of Martin and Kathleen King. In 1911, the family lived in Westbourne Street. Gerald was 15 at the time and with his father and elder brother worked as a printer and compositor employed by Messrs Carswell and Sons, Queen Street, Belfast. Gerald served with the Royal Enniskilling Fusiliers, 7th and 8th Battalion and reached the rank of sergeant. He was killed in action in France on March the 21st, 1918, aged just 22. Gerald is commemorated at the Pozières Memorial. William Pawley was 20 years old in 1914 and was living in Madison Avenue East with his grandparents Richard and Harriet Pawley and his siblings. William was a member of the Strandtown Unionist Club. He served as a private with the Seaforth Highlanders, 1st and 5th Battalion and saw action in France. He was injured at the Battle of the Somme and died of his wounds on July 28, 1916 at the age of 22. He is buried in Dartmoor Cemetery in France. His sister Harriet liaised with the army concerning his inscription on his headstone, God is love. After the war ended, 57 of our soldiers returned home to a changed and changing city. They brought with them the scars of battle, and the city they came to also bore the scars of change, including changes to the attitudes towards Irish language. Our soldiers continued to live and work in East Belfast, bringing up their families here on our streets. Edward Armstrong lived in Hatton Drive. He enlisted within weeks of the outbreak of the war and served with the 8th Royal Irish Rifles in France and Salonika. He survived injuries in 1916 and continued to serve until his discharge in April 1919. He was then 43 years old, had incurred hearing loss and was considered to be 20% disabled. He returned to his wife Mary and their 3 young children at their home on Hatton Drive, where he continued to live until at least 1932. Edward worked as a lithographic printer before the war and had been employed by Messrs David Allen and Son, who produced posters for the war. It seems his son, also called Edward, continued to live in Hatton Drive up until the end of the 1950s and may also have been a printer. The Gammon brothers, Jasper and William, lived in Harper Street with their parents and 4 siblings. Before the war, both had worked for Workman Clark and Company. Jasper served with the 8th Royal Irish Rifles and was deployed to France in October 1915. He was injured in the early days of the Battle of the Somme and was discharged due to his wounds. William also served in France with the Royal Engineers. He too was wounded, suffered shell shock and was transferred behind the lines. Both brothers survived the war and returned to Belfast. Jasper was 40% disabled and received a pension of 16 shillings. He married in 1920 and lived in Willowholme Crescent. Jasper and William died within a couple of years of each other in the 1940s. They are buried in Dundonald Cemetery. East Belfast continues to evolve and grow. Our community is rich in diversity, and the legacy of our Irish-speaking soldiers lingers here still.